During one of the battles in Frieren, a demon sets up a trap that should be impossible to avoid. In the middle of the fight, he sacrifices one of his own and turns her into something very specific, a human child. And if you have watched enough stories like this, you can probably already predict what happens next, because humans are very predictable in moments like these.
If a child is in danger, someone will try to protect them.
And that's exactly what happens. Genau steps in to save the child, and the demon immediately takes advantage of that hesitation to strike. From a strategic perspective, the plan works perfectly. The demon correctly predicts the human reaction and uses it to gain the upper hand. But despite understanding exactly how humans behave, the demons still lose that fight. And once you start thinking about that moment, a strange question appears. If the demons can predict the humans so well, why do they still fail to understand them? The first hint of the answer actually appears the moment the trap is set, because in one sense, the demon is completely right about humans. The moment the child appears on the battlefield, Genau steps forward to protect her, exactly like the demon expected. And if you pause and look at that moment purely from a strategic point of view, it almost feels like an obvious mistake. The situation is suspicious, timing makes no sense, and in the middle of the fight against demons, something like this is almost guaranteed to be a trap. You might even expect someone like Genau to realize that immediately. After all, the episode goes out of its way to present him as the opposite of a compassionate hero. When he is first introduced to Methode, he doesn't even acknowledge her handshake. He's blunt, unpleasant, and generally uninterested in social niceties. In other words, if anyone in this fight were going to ignore the bait and stay focused on the battle, Genau would probably be the safest bet. And yet, he still protects the child, even though the situation is suspicious, even though he understands it could easily be a trap. And after the attack lands, he even admits it himself. He says he shouldn't have acted out of character. That line is easy to overlook in the middle of the fight, but it reveals something important about the moment you just watched, because the demon predicted the human reaction perfectly. The child appears in danger, and a human steps in to protect them. But predicting the reaction isn't the same thing as understanding it, and that difference turns out to be the real problem for demons throughout this battle. From the demon's perspective, this moment proves that humans are irrational. Their instincts can be manipulated, their empathy can be exploited. But from the human perspective, protecting the child was never really a calculation in the first place. It's simply the kind of things humans do. And the strange part is, moments like this keep confusing the demons throughout the battle. In fact, at one point, one of them asks a question that sounds almost absurd from their perspective. Why do humans protect the graves of the dead? That question might sound strange at first, but if you pause for a moment and try to look at the situation from the demon's perspective, it actually starts to make a lot of sense. Why do humans protect the graves of the dead? The people buried there are already gone. They gain nothing from being protected. And from a purely practical standpoint, defending a place like that doesn't really provide any advantage. If you were approaching the world the way demons do, focusing only on outcomes and efficiency, the whole idea would probably seem completely pointless. And what's interesting about this moment is that the demon asking the question doesn't sound like she's mocking humans. She actually sounds curious, almost like she's trying to understand something that doesn't quite fit into the way demons normally think. But before that curiosity can go any further, Revolte shuts the conversation down immediately. According to him, understanding humans isn't important. As long as their behavior can be predicted, it can be exploited. And if you think back to the trap with the child earlier that I mentioned, that philosophy explains the entire strategy. The demon doesn't need to understand why a human would protect a child. It's enough to know that they will. But if you look closely, this way of thinking also reveals the real limitation of the demons, because by refusing to understand the meaning behind the human actions, they end up misunderstanding those actions entirely. Protecting a grave might look irrational if you are only thinking about efficiency, but for humans, actions like that aren't really about efficiency at all. They're about memory. about respect, about the idea that the people who came before you still matter, even after they are gone. And once you start looking at the battle through that perspective, the earlier moment with Genau starts to make a lot more sense too. Because protecting the child wasn't just a mistake or a lapse in judgment, it was a reflection of the same human impulse, the instinct to protect things that carry meaning, even when doing so isn't the most logical choice. And the more the battle continues, the clearer it becomes that this difference between humans and demons goes far beyond a single moment. Because when Revolt resumes the fight, he makes another assumption about humans, one that turns out to be just as dangerous. And as the battle continues, that misunderstanding starts appearing in other ways as well. When the fight between Revolt, Genau, and Stark resumes, the demon makes another confident assumption about humans, one that ends up revealing the same flaw in his thinking. During the fight, Stark and Genau manage to disarm him, but instead of backing down, Revolt simply keeps attacking with his bare hands, and while doing so, he mocks the humans for something he believes they've misunderstood. According to him, humans tend to think that weapons are limited to the arms someone carries, swords, spears, magic, but demons know better than that. Even without a weapon, their bodies can still be used to kill. To Revolt, that assumption is the human's fatal mistake. And if you're watching the fight in that moment, you might actually think he has a point. Despite losing his weapon, the demon continues to push forward relentlessly, and the situation quickly becomes desperate for the humans. But what Revolt fails to understand is that he's making a mistake of his own. Because while demons tend to focus on advantages like strength, weapons, and tactics, they consistently underestimate something much harder to measure: human persistence. Even when the situation looks hopeless, even when they are exhausted, even when they are clearly outmatched, humans keep fighting. And in this case, that stubborn persistence becomes the thing that finally turns the battle around. Stark refuses to give up the fight, and together with Genau, they manage to defeat Revolt before collapsing from exhaustion themselves. From the demon's perspective, the fight should have ended much earlier. The humans were injured, the situation was desperate, but humans don't always stop fighting just because the odds say they should. And once you start noticing that pattern, something interesting begins to emerge across the entire battle. Again and again, the demons correctly predict what humans will do, but they misunderstand the reasons behind those actions. And if you look closely, there is actually one more moment in the fight that captures that difference perfectly. While Stark and Genau are struggling against the Revolt, another fight is happening nearby. This time, Frieren is the one facing the demons, but the battlefield is covered in magical fog, which makes the situation much more dangerous than it might seem at first. Without clear visibility, every spell becomes harder to read, every attack harder to anticipate. And if you think about it from the demon's perspective, this is exactly the kind of advantage they rely on. Control the environment, limit your opponent's information, and force them to fight under conditions that favor you. At the same time, something interesting is happening on Frieren's side of the battlefield. Instead of stepping in immediately, Frieren simply watches the fight unfold. And if you're watching that moment for the first time, you might even wonder why she isn't interfering. After all, Frieren is easily powerful enough to end the fight herself, even if she isn't the first-class mage. But instead, she lets Fern handle it. And that decision turns out to be completely intentional. Because once Methode clears the fog, Fern immediately takes control of the fight and overwhelms the demons with precise, long-range magic. The shift happens almost instantly. What looked like a difficult situation suddenly becomes a decisive victory. And if you think about how that moment unfolds, it highlights another part of human behavior that demons struggle to account for. Humans don't just rely on their own strength, they rely on each other. Frieren trusts Fern to handle the fight. Methode creates the opening that makes that possible, and Fern delivers the attack that ends it. From the demon's perspective, that kind of reliance might look like a weakness. Depending on someone else means giving up control. But in practice, that trust is exactly what allows humans to overcome situations that should be impossible for them individually. And by the time the battle finally ends, you can start to see a pattern forming across all of these moments. Again and again, the demons correctly predict what humans will do, but they misunderstand the reasons behind those actions. And that misunderstanding keeps leading them to the wrong conclusions, which brings us back to the question we started with. So by the end of the battle, the question we started with begins to answer itself. If demons can predict humans so well, why do they still fail to understand them? And if you look back at the moments we just walked through, the pattern becomes surprisingly clear. The demons are actually very good at predicting human behavior. They know a human will try to save a child. They know humans defend places that don't seem strategically valuable. They know humans continue fighting even when the situation looks hopeless. But what they consistently fail to understand is the reason behind those actions. Because demons approach the world through logic, efficiency, and advantage. From that perspective, protecting a grave has no value. Saving a child in the middle of a battle is irrational. Continuing a fight when you have already been injured is simply inefficient. But humans don't make decisions based purely on efficiency. They act on empathy, on memory, on stubborn persistence, and on trust in the people fighting beside them. And interestingly, the demons don't just misunderstand these motivations, they dismiss them entirely. Revolt even says it directly during the battle. Understanding humans isn't important as long as their behavior can be predicted. It can be exploited. But that assumption turns out to be the demon's real weakness, because predicting what someone will do isn't the same as understanding why they do it. And that difference between prediction and understanding is exactly what separates humans and demons in Frieren. The demons can observe human behavior, they can imitate human speech, they can even predict human reactions, but the meaning behind those reactions, the empathy, the memories, and the values that guide human choices is something they never truly grasp. And because of that, the demons in Frieren will always be able to watch humans without ever really understanding them.